Since the last update of the Brookes project, we've seen a lot of the components that were being worked on separately come together. The assembly of the locomotive might seem like quite a simple task, but there really has been a huge amount of work that's gone on. Back here in front of the cylinder block, we've got the crossheads, the eccentrics down here. We've also been working on the slide bars and the pistons. So all this area here has seen an intense amount of engineering skill gone into it, really to develop the project onwards. The first thing we did once we got the pistons back into the cylinders was to line up the slide bars either top and bottom of the crossheads. We can see that the slide bars have been inserted at the top and at the bottom underneath here. This side here we can see very carefully that bits have been marked up, they've been measured. The shim is inserted into these gaps here and likewise underneath, and this adjusts the distance between the slide bars. This allows for the motion of the crosshead forwards and backwards, which you can see clearly attached here to the piston rod and here to the main crosshead and small end. This pin here, the gudgeon pin, connects to the connecting rods and provides the main motion of the locomotive. Another section of the locomotive which has really been a massive focus is this aspect here. This is the crank axle. This is really the beating heart of the locomotive. Aside from the boiler, this provides all of the motion alongside the cylinders. If elements of this crank axle are not correct, the locomotive really will not operate properly at all. There are two main aspects of the crank axle which we've been working on. The first of these is the main crank here. These, as we know them, are the big ends, and they connect via the connecting rod to the small ends, which we've just seen at the crosshead, and provide the main motion of the locomotive. These big end bearings needed to be precisely machined and precisely adjusted so that there's no wear or binding when the locomotive's in motion. The other element of the crank axle are the eccentrics, which are seen in the middle here. There are four, two for forwards, two for backwards, one on the left-hand cylinder, one on the right-hand cylinder. These eccentrics provide the valve motion to operate the locomotive's valves, as I've said, to send it in a forwards or rearwards motion. These eccentrics have provided us a real headache in actually getting correct and getting accurate. A lot of the surfaces around it have had to be remachined. A lot of them have had to be adjusted. But we are now happy that the motion of these around will be free enough to operate the locomotive without overheating. Another aspect, even down to the overhaul, we forget the small parts that really make up the operation of the locomotive. Things such as this. This here is a small lubrication cap that will have a cork in it. When the driver comes to oil up the locomotive in the morning, he'll remove the cork and pour oil down here. That will go into this recess in the top of the eccentric. Now, in order to make sure that all the oil isn't used up in a couple of rotations of the wheels, we make these trimmings. These trimmings are made of worsted wool. They're twisted together with a wire former and they're inserted into the lubrication hole inside the eccentric straps. So all these jobs, when you've got four eccentrics, you've got your main big ends, you've got all your other bearings, also on the crossheads as well. There's a huge amount of work involved in making these things, as well as actually the skilled work of machining and fitting up the various components. As a result, this that we can see here is many months of work that might seem like very little transformation to people who have been following this restoration video. Now that we've lowered the locomotive back down onto the axles, I can show you a bit of the work that we've been doing. This block of metal here might seem very ordinary, it might seem like there can't be very much work involved, but actually there's a huge amount. This is the main axle box, the main bearing in which the locomotive runs in. As the axle passes into the axle box, there's a keep underneath and a bearing on top. All of this has had to take a lot of attention to make sure that it's machined correctly and that the journal bearing inside again does not bind. One of the things that we do, obviously, to make sure the locomotive runs properly is to provide adequate lubrication. Like I showed you with the eccentrics, on the axle box we've also got a lubrication area. In the top here we have a well. This is filled with fresh oil every morning the locomotive runs. And the worsted trimmings that I talked about before, they're also in the top of the axle box just here. One of the main things as well about this restoration has been work on the horn guides. These guides here, which are bolted to the frames by fitted bolts, allow the axle box vertical movement so that the locomotive effectively has springing. We can see down at the bottom here, the leaf springs are attached via the spring hangers and spring pins, which we saw earlier in the overhaul video. To allow these horn guides to be correctly machined and to allow the axle box to have perfect movement without too much side play that would lead to wear has taken an awful lot of time. This can't really be easily done in a machine unless you take them out. So this has all been done by hand. We're measuring, more working, measuring until the perfect fit is achieved. When the axle boxes actually move up and down in the locomotive in service, it's really important that they don't stick at any point. This would leave a wheel suspended off the track and could lead to a serious derailment. Getting this part of the overhaul right is absolutely critical as far as safety and the future successful operation of the locomotive goes. Okay, now the locomotive's back down on its wheels, we've refitted the coupling rods and we're ready to refit the brake blocks, which will be attached here. Inside the coupling rods, we've also got similar oiling points to what we saw inside on the eccentrics. And if we remove these caps here, we'll also be able to find, when the overhaul's complete, the worsted trimmings for the lubrication. So the whole locomotive's lubrication system works in a very similar way, and when the crew come to prepare the locomotive in the morning, they know all the oiling points and exactly how to prepare the locomotive so that none of the components do not get lubricated and therefore wear out. So back where the restoration video started, this is the boiler of Brookes No.1. Having seen removing of the old tubes, we've now had to put new tubes back into the boiler. It was a pretty new boiler, it was only 10 years old when we started, so these tubes have been really the only major work which has taken place. There are about 170 tubes in the boiler, and these have all had to be refitted. We can see here the bright ends of the new tubes. We can also see the remaining holes where the washout plugs go for maintenance of the boiler. The marks on these tubes tell us that they've been expanded at this end and also beaded over at the firebox end. Now this means that all the tubes hopefully are sealed. When we put in these washout plugs, we'll fill the boiler with water and we'll check that everything is watertight. The boiler will then have to have a steam test to ensure that everything that has been attached to it, all the fittings and fixtures which we've still got to overhaul, are also steam tight and that the safety valves function. But for the moment, the restoration and overhaul of the boiler is pretty much complete, and it awaits the final completion of the chassis so that the two can be reunited once again after about a 3.5 year separation. Once the tubes have been refitted, it will be filled with water to check for any leaks. After that, the steam fittings will be replaced onto the back head here. A steam test will be carried out to check that there are no leaks and that also the safety valves operate correctly. The fittings that fit on the back here include the gauge glasses, the injectors, also the blower and regulator valves at the top here.